an issue uppermost in the minds of millions of people throughout our country, the pandemic of corruption. And it is an absolute honor, a pleasure, and a privilege for me to welcome to the Sunday Forum an eminent educationist and commentator on political affairs, Professor Adam Habib.
Wa alaikum salam, and thank you for having me.
Professor Adam, if I can just indulge and take 30 seconds of the 20 minutes allowed for this program, just to speak a little bit about a politician from India, and the story goes back 73 years. This person was born into, in terms of the caste society, was born as an untouchable. He wanted to get out of the shackles of that system. He became an attorney, a barrister. He joined the freedom movement in India with the fight against British rule. Eventually, after India became an independent and a free nation, this so-called untouchable was given the honor of drafting the first constitution of a free India. And it was on the day when the constitution was ratified in Parliament in New Delhi that he made the statement. And I'd like to read it so that this can be the point of departure for our discussion. B.R. Ambedkar says, "There is nothing wrong in being grateful to great men who have rendered lifelong services to their country. But there are limits to gratefulness. No man can be grateful at the cost of his honor. No woman can be grateful at the cost of her dignity. And no nation can be grateful at the cost of its liberty." In India, he said, the path of devotion or hero worship plays a major role in its politics. But he adds and he says, hero worship may be the path to the salvation of the soul. But in politics, hero worship is a sure road to degradation and eventually corruption. That was said 73 years ago, Prof. And today, in our country, 26 years after 1994, my question to you is, have we also idolized our leaders to our peril as we see the rampant corruption unfolding in front of us, Professor Adam?
Yeah, no, I entirely agree. I think his statement holds true not only for India, but it holds true for South Africa. You know, it's also worth saying that a similar sentiment was expressed by Nelson Mandela at the final ANC conference when he was president in 1997. And he reminded us that, and he said, if we land up doing, we meaning the ANC, land up doing to you, the citizen, what the apartheid state did, please do unto us what you did unto them.
I remember that.
And I think those are powerful words because effectively we have worshipped our political leaders and they have taken us for granted. They have taken us for granted. The ANC and the senior leadership in the ANC has taken us for granted over many years, and particularly over the last 10, 12, 13 years in particular. You know, accountability in any democracy, the way accountability works in a democracy is by ensuring that you have the right to throw out the politician. It is the fact that they can get thrown out that creates the incentive for them to act in the interests of the citizen.
Exactly.
Otherwise, there's no incentive for them to act in the interests of the citizen. Sure. A democracy operates on the assumption that you get the worst leader. And when you get the worst leader, it's the threat of throwing them out of office that creates the opportunity for them to act in the citizens' interests.
So it's actually
the problem in South Africa is that we don't have that. Yes, we have a multi-party democracy, but it's precisely because of that hero worship. It is the thankfulness and gratefulness to the ANC that they don't believe they can get thrown out. And because they don't believe they can get thrown out, they have committed the most outrageous atrocities around corruption over the last 20, 25 years. And I think it's astonishing that we've allowed them to get away with it. And it's absolutely incumbent on us, firstly, to address this, but secondly, to ensure that no politician is ever given this opportunity again.
All right, I'll come to that a little later on. So basically, it's a question of, if I can say, tongue-in-cheek, the difference between democracy and democracy. But let me pose the next question to you, and this is more at a macro level, Prof. What makes people lust for greed? If you look at Lebanon at the moment, the underlying issue, again, is corruption. If you look at India, it's been a hotbed of corruption throughout the political life of the Congress party. Just how bad is the scourge internationally, Prof?
So I think, look, corruption is a major crisis globally. And it's a particularly major crisis in the developing world and in the developed world. So it is true that if you go to the United States and see some of the outrageous decisions made by Donald Trump, like the appointment of his daughter and family members in the White House, the fact that he uses his own hotels, which make an income out of his office, all of that is outrageous. But you see the big difference when you corrupt in the US or the UK is people don't die as much as people die in South Africa. When you engage in the corruption that has happened around this particular pandemic, when you are corrupt around the protective equipment, because you corrupt, people die. Because you corrupt, what you begin to see is a situation where children do not have food to eat. And because you corrupt, there is life threat. The medication that is required for people to survive is not given to them. And so literally, I have been angry and others have been angry because what these politicians have done in the middle of this pandemic is they've taken bread from children's mouths. And that's the difference. And you're right. I think we should assume that all of our societies are driven by an economic logic to consume. Today we have a Mercedes-Benz. Tomorrow we want a Rolls-Royce. Today we have a 3-bedroom house. Tomorrow we want a 5-bedroom house. Today you're living in Rondebosch. Tomorrow you want to live in Camps Bay.
Yes.
The human spirit has two phenomena. There's two defining features. It has greed, but it has great empathy. It can go either way. And it's the social conditions under which you live, the political society in which you live, the social conventions in which you live that will direct you to the pathway of empathy. Islam makes this as an important point. We all act as a check on each other.
Right.
When there is no check on anyone, they become rampant. And this is the problem with the politicians. There's been no check, and that's why we've had the kinds of corruption that we've had in the last couple of years.
So I want to come back to our South African situation and the issue of corruption. And the question which I want to ask you is, are the looters still looting?
So clearly the looters are still looting. We saw that in this latest pandemic and around the PPEs, the protective equipment and the tenders that were associated with the protective equipment. In Gauteng, where I'm based, the vast majority of the companies that got the tenders all registered and opened up as companies after March. Only after March. So what track record they ever had in providing this kind of equipment is nobody knows. And so yes, the corruption, the looting is happening. Having said that, I do think that there is action being taken against some people.
Okay.
So for instance, there's a wonderful piece by J.P. Luntman, who explains the number of actions that have been taken against politicians, against individuals. Around the country, people are being charged. In the new cabinet, a number of people, Batabile, Nomvula, Gigaba, all have been thrown out. So it is true, there has been action. My argument is there hasn't been sufficient action.
Okay.
And I want to be honest, some of the most senior leaders who stole, I want to see them in jail. Because only when they are in jail will the lesson go out that there are consequences for looting. If you just lock up the guy at the bottom, there's no consequence. There's no serious consequence. And it seems to me that that's the problem with what the president has done. So is he doing the right thing? Yes, in individual actions. But that doesn't show leadership. If you want to lead, what you have to do is you have to construct a narrative that sends a message that there are consequences for corruption. However important you are, you will be in jail. And until we see some senior political leaders, including from within the ANC, in jail, the South African citizens will not be confident that Cyril Ramaphosa has their back. So yes, he's done some things, but he has to do far more than what he has done.
You spoke about Gauteng, and I just read an article in the Daily Maverick yesterday about a 500 million rand PPE tender with hugely inflated prices. The question I want to ask is that with the pandemic of corruption, are we heading for a recapture in South Africa?
So my own view is that it's going to be far more difficult for them to recapture the state. It's going to be far more harder for a repeat of the Jacob Zuma years between 2009 and 2017, early 18. And the reason is very simple. Because I think South Africans are khatwa. They seriously khatwa. The only reason that Cyril Ramaphosa reacted the way he did at the NEC last week is because he knows South Africans are khatwa. And he knows that people are angry. And you can see it in the way people speak. You can see it as how openly people are critical of the ruling party and other politicians. South Africans are truly hurtful of the political elite, and frankly, the ANC political elite in particular. And Cyril knows this. And he knows that there are going to be consequences for this in the next elections unless something changes. In the last elections, they lost. In the local government elections, they lost effectively. They had already lost Cape Town earlier, but they lost PE. They lost Pretoria. They lost Johannesburg. The ANC is on a thin thread. The only thing that they've been lucky at is there haven't been great alternatives.
Yes.
If there had been good political alternatives, the ANC would have been thrown out a long time ago. And Cyril Ramaphosa knows this, and I think that's why he reacted the way he did.
Prof, I want to ask you, the way forward, how do we install the culture of good governance as opposed to the so-called democratic government that we seem to sometimes yearn for, but lets us down? What would you say would be a defining issue between good governance and a democratic government?
So here's what I think. If there is one thing we have to do as a collective citizenry, it's we have to have the courage to throw out the ruling party. We must just have that courage, because I said this and I started. A politician only governs in the interests of the citizens because of the threat of being thrown out of power. If there's no threat, there's no incentive to act in the interests of citizens, because there's too much money, there's too much power, and, absolute power corrupts in a sense. And the only thing that keeps that politician, whoever it is, whether it's Jacob Zuma, whether it's Cyril Ramaphosa, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Boris Johnson, whoever it is, the only thing that keeps them on the straight and narrow is the threat of being thrown out. As soon as there's no threat, there's no incentive. And that threat has to re-emerge. And to do that, we have to have a decent political alternative, and we have to have the courage to vote that decent political alternative. The day we don't do that is the day we don't have the ability to hold our politicians to account.
Prof, I would agree with you that we need to have a decent political alternative. But the question that begs an answer is, at the moment, is there a viable alternative of a political party that can govern the country nationally?
As you know, I've said before, I don't think there is. I think that part of the problem is, if you look at the DA is seen to be, I must be honest, I think it's more efficient than the ANC. I think it's far more efficient than the ANC in many ways. But I don't think that the vast majority of people in this country believe that the DA represents the interests. They think that the DA reflects elite interests, it reflects white interests, and even though there might be a majority of black people voting for it, they still believe that it doesn't sufficiently represent. And I think it needs to change its language, it needs to change its imagery, it needs to change how it speaks. Because unless it's capable of showing the vast majority of people that it represents their interests, the DA will always be a regional party. It won't become a national party. The EFF, I don't think South Africans trust it, to be honest. I think they think it's a bunch of young wild card who behave, who come up with the most craziest of policies, who have no experience in running, and frankly, often act like political thugs. That's the problem. And that's the only reason the ANC has survived. The ANC should thank its lucky stars that the alternatives have been that bad, because otherwise it would have long been thrown out of power. But I do think that South Africans are now so hurtful that if you watch every election, black people have stopped voting in this country. The number of people who turn out to vote is for every single time lower and lower. And I think that people are so hurtful that even without an alternative, they'll throw the ANC out because they're so hurtful. And I think that Cyril Ramaphosa knows it, which is why we're beginning to see some movement. I absolutely think we have to take action. And it's not going to be good enough to lock the little guys up. They have to start locking the big guys up before South Africans have any confidence in the political leadership that we have at the moment.
So the second last question would then be, Prof, the pending elections next year, your message as a political commentator to people, ordinary people who love the country, who want the country to prosper, what would your message be to them?
My message would be to say very, very clearly, when you vote, is to vote very clearly. We are not here to tolerate people who have corrupt. Anybody who has been tainted by corruption, who refuses to be accountable, who refuses to act in the interest, we will throw you out of power. However much, however important you are. You know, I want to make it clear. Many of us fought in the anti-apartheid struggle. Nobody, for all of my adult life, I was a political activist. Nobody in this country owes me a single thing, because I did that because it was my responsibility to do that. This country owes me nothing. All it owes me is to give me the right to compete as any other human being, as any other citizen in this country. That's all it owes me. It owes me nothing more than that. And no politician has the right to say, because I was in the struggle, I can be paid extra, or I can loot the public coffers the way I do. And that's something we must make clear to all politicians at municipal, at provincial, and at national level in the coming years.
Just coming back to the last question, and coming back to the topic under discussion, which is rampant corruption. What has happened in the last maybe 10 years or so? Would you sum it up as some form of, and particularly when you mentioned earlier on about how poor people have been affected, there are millions of people actually sleeping on the streets at the moment. Would you say that this is some form of a crime against our humanity in this country?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I know people get really angry when people say that corruption is a crime against humanity, but in this kind of climate, I have no doubt that corruption is a crime against humanity. And it's a crime against humanity because you're not stealing from the rich. You know, you're stealing from the really poor. It is because you steal that poor people don't get social support grants. It's because you steal that young children are starving. It's because you steal that people can't get decent education in this country or decent healthcare. And so I think it's an absolute crime. You know, what we've developed in South Africa is what I call, we talk about BEE, but much of BEE has turned out to be a comprador bourgeoisie. It's a kind of Marxist language. It's a bourgeoisie that doesn't produce what normal capitalists do, which is start an economy, start new companies, create jobs, make profit. They loot off the public purse. And that's the kind of a comprador bourgeoisie. We got a parasitic political class. And I think we must make it very, very clear and stand up collectively as society against them. Because if we don't, they will destroy this country and none of us will have a future.
Professor Adam Habib, as always, an absolute pleasure and an absolute honor to be able to talk with you. Very forthright, very fearless. Not only do you have a very sharp mind, but you have a very, very strong spine, and you say it the way it is. We'd like to thank you very, very much. I know that you are taking up a new assignment in December. I'd like to wish you all the best, inshallah. And whenever you are back in South Africa and you have a chance to come and visit us in Cape Town, please remember that the doors of Masjid al-Quds are always open to you, Professor Adam Habib. Thank you so much, and go well, and may everything go well for you, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.